April 14th, 1945. A one-eyed Canadian soldier walked alone into a Nazi-occupied Dutch city of 50,000 people, armed with 2 submachine guns and a bag of grenades. His best friend lay dead at the city's edge. Over the next 6 hours, he would terrorize hundreds of German defenders into believing thousands of Allied troops were attacking. By dawn, the entire garrison had fled, and an artillery bombardment that would have killed thousands of civilians was cancelled. This wasn't fiction. This was Léo Major. I'm John Donald, and you're watching John Donald, WWII Records. If you want to discover the verified stories of World War II's most incredible heroes whose actions saved thousands of lives, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. But Swallow wasn't even Léo Major's first impossible achievement. Weeks earlier, during the brutal Battle of the Scheldt, this same soldier had captured 93 German soldiers completely alone, and he did it after losing an eye to a grenade blast in Normandy. The German High Command would later describe him as more dangerous than an entire platoon. His own commanders didn't know whether to court-martial him or give him medals. He received the Distinguished Conduct Medal twice, the only Canadian in history to earn this honor, but he refused the first one because he thought the general presenting it was incompetent.
Léo Major was born on January 23, 1921, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to French-Canadian parents who moved the family to Montreal before his first birthday. He grew up in a tough working-class neighborhood during the Great Depression. Life wasn't easy. His relationship with his father was difficult enough that Léo left home at 14 to live with his aunt. As a teenager, he trained as a plumber, working construction jobs around Montreal. But when war broke out, 19-year-old Léo saw an opportunity to prove himself and find the adventure he craved. In 1940, he enlisted in the Canadian Army and was assigned to Le Régiment de la Chaudière, a French-Canadian infantry unit. He spent the next 4 years training, first in New Brunswick, then in England, preparing for the invasion of Europe. Major was selected for the Scout Platoon, an elite role requiring intelligence, courage, and the ability to operate alone behind enemy lines. Scouts were the eyes and ears of the regiment, sent ahead to gather intelligence on enemy positions. It was dangerous work with a high casualty rate, but Major excelled at it. By June 1944, Léo was 23 years old, a skilled soldier, and ready for combat. He had no idea that in the next 11 months, he would become one of the most decorated and legendary soldiers Canada has ever produced.
June 6, 1944. D-Day. Léo Major hit Juno Beach with the Régiment de la Chaudière as part of the massive Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied France. The beach was a killing ground. German machine guns fired from concrete bunkers, cutting down Canadians as they waded through the surf. Artillery shells exploded in the sand. The air filled with smoke, screams, and the thundering roar of naval bombardment. The Canadians took 961 casualties that first day, 340 of them killed. But they pushed forward with fierce determination. Major's first action of the war was blowing up a German bunker with a Bangalore torpedo, capturing a dozen enemy soldiers in the process. Later that same day, he and another scout encountered a German half-track with 3 soldiers inside. They attacked immediately. Major killed one, wounded the driver, and captured the vehicle, which contained valuable German communication codes and documents. When his son asked him years later if he was scared on D-Day, Major's response was simple and honest. No, I was too busy shooting at the Germans. But war extracts a price from everyone, even the bravest. Just weeks after D-Day, during the battle for the village of Rotz, Major was sent on a reconnaissance mission with 4 other soldiers. They ran into a German patrol near Carpiquet. A firefight erupted. 4 of the 5 Germans were killed quickly. The 5th, badly wounded, threw a phosphorus grenade as a final act of defiance. The grenade struck Léo Major directly in the face.
Phosphorus burns at extremely high temperatures and cannot be extinguished with water. When it hit Major's face, it ignited, searing his flesh and destroying his left eye. The pain was indescribable. He was rushed to a field hospital, then evacuated to England for treatment. Doctors saved his life but couldn't save his eye. He lost 80% of the vision in it. The medical staff assumed his war was over. Soldiers who lost an eye were sent home. Léo Major refused to accept this. He argued furiously with the doctors and his commanders. As a sniper and scout, he insisted he only needed one eye to aim his weapon. He would not abandon his regiment. He would not go home while the war continued and his friends were still fighting. The argument went on for weeks, but Major's determination never wavered. Finally, against all regulations and common sense, his commanders relented. He was allowed to return to his unit. He reported back to the Régiment de la Chaudière in July 1944, now wearing a black eye patch that made him look like a pirate. His fellow soldiers were stunned to see him back. Most men would have gratefully accepted the ticket home. Major wasn't most men. He immediately resumed his duties as a scout, proving he could still operate effectively with one eye. If anything, losing the eye seemed to make him more aggressive, more determined, and more willing to take risks. The Germans would soon learn to fear the one-eyed Canadian scout.
By October 1944, the Allies had liberated most of France and pushed into Belgium and the Netherlands. But they faced a critical supply problem. The port of Antwerp had been captured intact, but it couldn't be used because the Germans still controlled the Scheldt River estuary leading to the North Sea. Without Antwerp's port facilities, Allied armies were running dangerously low on ammunition, fuel, and supplies. The job of clearing the Scheldt was given to the Canadian First Army. The Battle of the Scheldt became one of the bloodiest campaigns Canadian forces ever fought. The terrain was a nightmare. Flooded fields, canals, and waterlogged ground turned every advance into a slow, exhausting slog. The Germans had fortified every building, every dike, every piece of high ground. They fought with desperate ferocity, knowing that losing the Scheldt meant losing the war. Over 5 weeks of brutal combat, the Canadians suffered 6,367 casualties. The 3rd Canadian Division, which had been fighting continuously since D-Day, was approaching collapse from exhaustion and psychological trauma. Léo Major fought through the entire campaign. In late October, a group of Canadian recruits were sent on patrol and failed to return. Major and his friend, Corporal Wilfried Arsenault, volunteered to find them. When Arsenault fell ill, Major went alone. What he found was abandoned Canadian equipment, clear evidence the patrol had been captured or killed. Rather than simply report back, Major decided to press deeper into German territory to gather more intelligence. It was a decision that would lead to one of the most audacious actions of his career.
Moving through the darkness, Léo Major spotted 2 German soldiers walking along a dike. He was alone, deep in enemy territory, but he saw an opportunity. He ambushed the first soldier quietly, taking him prisoner without firing a shot. Then he used that prisoner as bait to capture the second German. Both men were terrified of the one-eyed Canadian, who had appeared out of nowhere. Major forced the 2 prisoners to lead him to their commanding officer. They walked through the night to a German position where the officer was sleeping, believing himself safe behind strong defensive lines. Major entered the headquarters and woke the German commander at gunpoint. The officer couldn't believe what was happening. A single Canadian soldier had penetrated his defenses, captured 2 sentries, and was now standing in his bedroom. Major informed him calmly that he was now a prisoner of war, but Major wasn't finished. He marched the commander to nearby barracks where 93 German soldiers were sleeping. When the soldiers woke to find their commander captured and a Canadian soldier with a weapon pointed at them, they surrendered immediately. Major now faced a new problem: how to get nearly 100 prisoners back to Canadian lines without them realizing he was alone. He radioed for a Canadian tank to meet him and provide support. Then he began the long march back with his captives. SS troops in a nearby position spotted the mass surrender and opened fire, killing 7 Germans and wounding others. Major ignored the incoming fire, ordered his Canadian tank to suppress the SS position, and continued marching his surviving 93 prisoners to the Canadian front lines. His commanders were speechless when he arrived. They recommended him for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, second only to the Victoria Cross in recognition of valor. But when Major learned that Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery would present the award, he refused it. He believed Montgomery was incompetent and had no right to give out medals. This refusal became legendary. In February 1945, the Régiment de la Chaudière moved into the Rhineland to continue the push into Germany. On February 21st, Léo Major was riding in a truck when it struck a landmine.
The explosion was catastrophic. A chaplain and 3 other soldiers in the vehicle were killed instantly. Major was thrown from the truck with tremendous force. He broke both ankles. He fractured his spine. He injured his back so severely that doctors initially thought he might never walk again. He was transported to a military hospital in Belgium. Once again, medical staff assumed his war was over. A soldier with a broken back needed months of recovery and would likely face permanent limitations. Major would surely be evacuated to England, then shipped home to Canada. His war service, already remarkable, would end with an honorable discharge due to injury. That's what any reasonable person would have accepted. Léo Major was not reasonable. Despite his injuries, despite his entire chest being in a plaster cast, despite being barely able to move, he decided to escape from the hospital. He couldn't tolerate being away from his regiment while the war continued. He managed to make his way to Nijmegen in the Netherlands, where he stayed with a woman he had met earlier. For weeks, he rested and argued with his commanders, insisting he would return to duty. Somehow, impossibly, by late March, he had healed enough to rejoin the Régiment de la Chaudière. He was still injured, still in pain, but mobile enough to fight. On March 29, 1945, he was back with his unit. Less than 2 weeks later, he would perform the action that would make him a legend. Section 8. The Mission to Zwolle. On April 12, 1945, the Régiment de la Chaudière reached Zwolle, an important Dutch city of 50,000 civilians in the central Netherlands. The city was occupied by German Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS troops. Estimates of the garrison's strength varied, with sources reporting anywhere from several hundred to over 1,500 German soldiers entrenched in defensive positions throughout the city. The Canadian plan was straightforward but brutal. Artillery would bombard Zwolle the next morning, destroying German positions, but also killing countless Dutch civilians and reducing the city to rubble. The regimental commander asked for volunteers to conduct reconnaissance before the bombardment. He needed to know the exact German positions, strength, and defensive layout. It was an extremely dangerous mission. Scouts would have to infiltrate German lines at night, gather intelligence, and return before dawn. 2 men stepped forward, Léo Major and Corporal Wilfred Welly. Arsenault. The 2 friends left Canadian lines at 9:30 p.m. on April 13th. They moved carefully through the darkness towards Zwolle's outskirts. Around midnight, as they approached the railroad tracks that ringed the city, everything went wrong. A German machine gun position they hadn't detected opened fire. Welly Arsenault was hit multiple times and killed instantly. Major charged the machine gun position through a hail of bullets, his Sten gun blazing. He killed the entire German crew, but it was too late to save his friend. Arsenault lay dead in the mud.
Most soldiers would have retreated at this point. The mission had failed. 1 man was dead. The Germans were now alert. But Léo Major was filled with rage at the death of his friend. He decided that Zwolle would pay for Arsenault's life. He decided to complete the mission alone. More than that, he decided to liberate the entire city himself. Major entered Zwolle around 1 a.m., carrying 2 Sten submachine guns and a bag full of grenades. The streets were largely deserted. Most of the German garrison was sleeping or manning defensive positions on the city's perimeter. Major began moving through Zwolle systematically, firing his weapons and throwing grenades to create maximum noise and chaos. Every few minutes, gunfire would erupt from a different part of the city. Explosion echoed through the streets. It sounded exactly like a large-scale coordinated attack by multiple Canadian units. Confused German soldiers jumped out of bed, grabbed their weapons, and ran toward the sounds of combat. But when they arrived, they found nothing but smoke and spent shell casings. Then gunfire would erupt from a completely different direction. Major was moving constantly, never staying in one place, always keeping the Germans off balance and confused. Some German soldiers he encountered, he killed. Others, he captured and sent running back to their commanders with warnings that thousands of Canadians were attacking. Major also contacted members of the Dutch resistance. He organized them into patrols and positioned them at strategic points throughout the city. Now the Germans were seeing armed men appearing all over Zwolle. The psychological effect was devastating. The Germans believed they were facing a massive, well-coordinated assault from overwhelming forces.
At one point, during the night, Major entered a bar where German officers were drinking, apparently unaware that their city was under attack. He took them hostage at gunpoint. Among them was an Alsatian officer who spoke French. Major had a conversation with this man, explaining calmly that Zwolle was completely surrounded by Canadian forces. At 6 a.m., Canadian artillery would begin shelling the city. Every building would be destroyed. Every German soldier would be killed. The Dutch civilians caught in the bombardment would die by the thousands. But Major offered an alternative. If the Germans evacuated the city immediately, they could escape across the IJssel River to the east. They would live. The Dutch civilians would live. The city would be spared. To demonstrate he was serious, and to show he wasn't bluffing about the Canadian presence, Major then did something extraordinary. He returned the German officer's sidearm to him. This gesture, this act of trusting an enemy officer, seemed to convince the Germans that Major was telling the truth. After releasing the officers, Major took one final action to ensure maximum chaos. He set the Gestapo headquarters building on fire. The building, located on Pottgieter Single Street, burned through the night, flames visible across the entire city. The fire served multiple purposes. It destroyed German police records and prisoner files. It created a visible symbol of German authority collapsing. And it convinced German commanders that they were losing control of Zwolle. The combination of constant gunfire from multiple locations, explosions, resistance fighters appearing throughout the city, captured German soldiers reporting massive Canadian forces, and now the Gestapo headquarters burning created complete panic among the German garrison. By 4:30 a.m. on April 14th, German commanders made their decision. They ordered a full evacuation of Zwolle. Hundreds of German soldiers abandoned their positions and retreated across the IJssel River to the east. They left behind weapons, ammunition, supplies, and defensive positions. They fled because they believed they were facing overwhelming Allied forces that had already penetrated the city center. In reality, they were fleeing from one exhausted, injured, one-eyed Canadian soldier who had been running through their city for 6 hours straight, firing weapons, throwing grenades, and using psychological warfare to create an illusion of massive strength. When the last German soldier left Zwolle, Léo Major collapsed from exhaustion. He had been moving and fighting for over 6 hours without rest. He was still recovering from a broken back. He was operating on adrenaline, rage, and determination alone. But before he could rest, he had one final duty. He retrieved the body of Weli Arsenault from where his friend had fallen near the railroad tracks. Major carried Arsenault's body back through the city toward Canadian lines. The Dutch resistance helped him. As dawn broke over Zwolle, Dutch civilians emerged from their homes cautiously, unable to believe what they were seeing. The Germans were gone. The city was free, and a single Canadian soldier was walking through their streets. When Léo Major reported back to his commanding officer that Zwolle was clear of Germans, the officer initially didn't believe him. Major insisted that the city was liberated and that the planned artillery bombardment should be cancelled immediately. Reconnaissance confirmed Major's report. Zwolle was indeed free of German forces. The bombardment that would have killed thousands of Dutch civilians and destroyed the historic city was called off. 50,000 Dutch men, women, and children had been saved by the actions of one Canadian soldier. The city's buildings, churches, homes, and infrastructure remained intact. When the full story became known, Major's commanding officer wrote in his recommendation for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, "The gallant conduct of this soldier, his personal initiative, his dauntless courage and entire disregard for personal safety, was an inspiration to all." This time Major accepted the medal. Unlike the first DCM he had refused after capturing the 93 Germans, this award would be presented by Canadian officers he respected. The citation detailed his actions at Zwolle: entering the city alone after his friend was killed, contacting the Dutch resistance, creating the illusion of a major attack, setting the Gestapo headquarters on fire, and forcing the German garrison to withdraw. It concluded by noting that his actions spared the city from destruction. The Dutch people of Zwolle never forgot what Léo Major had done for them. In the immediate aftermath of liberation, they celebrated in the streets. After 5 years of Nazi occupation, terror, hunger, and oppression, they were finally free. And they knew they had been saved by a one-eyed Canadian who fought like a demon through the night to protect people he had never met. The war in Europe ended less than a month after Zwola's liberation. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. Léo Major returned to Canada later that year and tried to resume a normal life. He married a woman named Pauline and worked as a plumber in Montreal. He rarely spoke about the war. His children grew up knowing almost nothing about what their father had done. This silence was common among veterans of his generation. The things they had seen and done were too terrible to share with loved ones. But in 1975, 30 years after the war, a Dutch official somehow tracked down Major's address. The official arrived at his home and told Major's family about Zwolle, about the liberation, and about how the city had never forgotten the Canadian who saved them. Major's children were shocked. Their father had never mentioned any of this. His son was 9 years old when he first learned what his father had accomplished during the war. In 2005, 3 years before his death, Léo Major was made an honorary citizen of Zwolle. He and Pauline traveled to the Netherlands for the ceremony. The city had named a street after him. His story was taught in schools. The liberation of Zwolle had become a central part of the city's identity and history. When Major walked through Zwolle in 2005, elderly Dutch people who had been children during the liberation approached him to shake his hand and thank him. Some of them cried. They remembered April 14, 1945, the day freedom came. But Léo Major's military career wasn't over in 1945. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, Major re-enlisted. Despite being nearly 30 years old, despite having only one good eye, despite his old back injuries, he joined the 2nd Battalion, Royal 22nd Regiment, known as the Van Deuce. In November 1951, Chinese forces attacked and captured Hill 355, a critical strategic position known as Little Gibraltar. Major, now a sergeant, was ordered to lead his section in a counterattack to retake the hill. Under heavy Chinese fire, Major led from the front, advancing up the hill through machine gun fire and grenades. His section suffered casualties, but Major kept pushing forward. When they reached the summit, hand-to-hand fighting erupted. Major personally killed several Chinese soldiers in close combat. His section held the hill against multiple Chinese counterattacks throughout the night. For this action, Léo Major was awarded his 2nd Distinguished Conduct Medal, making him the only Canadian in history to receive this decoration twice in 2 different wars. The citation praised his gallantry, leadership, and complete disregard for personal safety. After Korea, Major finally retired from military service. He had fought in 2 wars, lost an eye, broken his back, survived countless battles, and earned more decorations than almost any other Canadian soldier in history.
Léo Major died on October 12, 2008, at age 87, in a hospital in Longueuil, Quebec, surrounded by family. He had lived a long life after the wars, working as a plumber, raising children, and enjoying grandchildren. But he never forgot the men who didn't come home. He never forgot Willie Arsenault, killed on the outskirts of Zwolle. He never forgot the friends lost in Normandy, the Scheldt, and Korea. In Zwolle, a bronze statue of Léo Major stands in military uniform, rifle in hand, looking toward the city he liberated. On the 75th anniversary of the liberation in 2020, the local soccer club, FC Zwolle, put his name on their game jerseys. The city continues to teach his story to every generation of schoolchildren. One elderly Dutch man who was 12 years old on Liberation Day wrote in an online memorial, "He became my instant hero. We learned that freedom is not free. It's vulnerable. It must be protected." Léo Major's legacy reminds us that individual courage can change history. One soldier, fighting alone, saved 50,000 people from death and destruction. He captured 93 enemies when outnumbered nearly 100 to 1. He refused to quit when wounded, when blinded, when his back was broken. He embodied the Canadian fighting spirit, tough, resourceful, and absolutely relentless. If this story moved you, subscribe to John Donald, WWII Records. Share this video so Léo Major's memory lives on, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. This hero deserves to be remembered, and you just helped make sure he never will be forgotten.